A father's fury, the night justice took hold. It was a Saturday evening in late spring, the kind of night that feels like a reward after a long, grueling week. The air in Rosie's Diner, a cozy spot just off Main Street in suburban Ohio, carried the comforting aroma of sizzling burgers, warm cornbread, and fresh coffee. The place was alive with the hum of conversation, the clink of silverware, and the soft jangle of classic rock from the jukebox. For Tom Harper, his wife Laura, and their 4-year-old daughter, Sophie, it was a rare moment of peace. After a week of endless work meetings, late-night emails, and Sophie's teething tantrums that could wake the neighbors, this dinner was their sanctuary. Tom sat across from Laura, her brown eyes tired but softened by the glow of the diner's warm lights. Sophie, a bundle of energy in her sparkly unicorn leggings and a yellow hoodie with floppy puppy ears, was scribbling on her kid's menu with a green crayon. Her latest masterpiece, a lopsided dragon with a toothy grin. "Daddy, this is you," she giggled, holding it up proudly. Her laughter was like a melody, pure and unfiltered, cutting through the noise of the diner. Tom leaned back, his chest loosening with a warmth he hadn't felt all week. "Big teeth, huh?" he teased, winking at Laura, who let out a real laugh, not the exhausted chuckle she'd been managing lately. The diner was a familiar haunt, the kind of place where waitresses knew your name and the coffee was always hot. Families filled the booths, kids colored, and servers darted between tables with practiced ease. For a moment, everything was perfect. Sophie's giggles, Laura's smile, the promise of a warm meal was the kind of ordinary magic that made life worth living. But then came the first ripple, a sharp, deliberate cough from the booth behind them. Not a casual throat clearing, but a pointed, aggressive sound, like someone was announcing their displeasure. Tom glanced at Laura, who stiffened slightly but kept smiling at Sophie. They both felt Ida's subtle shift in the air, like a storm brewing on a clear day. Another cough, louder, followed by the rhythmic tap of fingernails on wood. Not impatient, not random calculated, like a warning. Tom turned his head just enough to catch a glimpse of the woman behind them. She sat rigid, her posture screaming disapproval. Her hair was a stiff, blonde bob, her lips pursed so tightly they seemed to vanish. She wore a crisp white blouse and pearl earrings, her eyes locked on their table with a look of pure disdain. Sophie, oblivious, made her straw whistle again, clapping her hands in delight. That laugh, so free and joyful, seemed to ignite something in the woman. The tapping stopped. She stood. Her heels clicked like gunfire as she marched toward their table, her face a mask of righteous fury. The diner paused, forks hesitated, heads turned. "Excuse me," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Could you maybe control your child? This is a restaurant, not a playground." Laura blinked, caught off guard. "I'm sorry, she's just laughing," she said softly. The woman later they'd learn her name was Diane Hist. "Some of us are trying to eat in peace, not listen to your kid's circus act." Tom's grip tightened on the edge of the table. "She's 4, he said, his voice low and steady. "She's not screaming. She's happy. Maybe you're the one who needs to adjust." Diane's eyes narrowed, her scoff dripping with contempt. "You should teach her manners. This behavior is unacceptable." She looked at Sophie like she was a stray dog begging for scraps. Tom stood slowly, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow over her. "You made a mistake," he said, his voice colder now. "You approached the wrong family. Sit down, or you'll find out what happens when you mess with mine." Diane blinked, momentarily stunned, then spun on her heel, muttering something venomous under her breath. Her teenage kids at her table kept their heads down, staring at their phones like they wished they could disappear. Tom sat back down, his eyes never leaving her. Laura's hand found his under the table, her fingers trembling slightly. "She'll leave us alone now," Laura whispered. But Tom knew better. The air felt heavier, like the calm before a tornado. Diane didn't just return to her seat. She stormed to the front counter, her finger jabbing the air as she demanded the manager. "I want to speak to someone in charge," she shouted, her voice carrying over the diner like a siren. A young manager, Greg, stepped forward, his face calm but wary. Their server, Jenny, hovered nearby, looking uneasy. Diane launched into a tirade, arms flailing, pointing at Tom's family. "They're letting their kid scream like an animal. I asked politely, and that man threatened me. I don't feel safe. Tom stood again, ignoring Laura's gentle tug on his arm. He crossed the diner, his boots heavy on the tile. Greg glanced at him, then back at Diane, his brow furrowing. "Ma'am, I'll talk to them, but please lower your voice," he said. Diane's jaw dropped. "I'm not yelling. I'm reporting a disturbance. That child is a nuisance. It's neglect. I should call child services." And then she did. Right there, in front of everyone. She pulled out her phone and dialed, her voice loud and performative. "Yes, I'm at Rosie's diner, and there's a child here completely out of control. The parents refuse to do anything. It's disruptive. It's abusive." Tom's blood boiled. He stepped forward, but Greg blocked him. "Sir, I've got this," Greg said, his voice firm but nervous. "No," Tom growled, his eyes locked on Diane. "You don't." He turned to her, his voice cutting through her theatrics. "You just crossed a line. You want to make this official? Fine. Let's make it official." Diane smirked, still on the phone, but her eyes flickered with something new uncertainty. For the first time, she looked like she might have underestimated him. Diane's smirk hung on her face like a mask, but her eyes betrayed a twitch of doubt, a crack in her armor. She stood near the hostess stand, phone pressed to her ear, her voice a venomous performance for the entire diner. "Yes, officer, I'm serious," she said, pacing in tight circles. "This child is out of control, possibly neglected, maybe even injured." "Injured?" Tom's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. Sophie was still at their booth, quietly sipping water through her bendy straw, her green crayon now drawing a wobbly sun. His daughter, his heart, was fine until Diane decided she wasn't. Tom took a step forward, his boots hitting the tile with purpose. Greg, the manager, raised a hand, his voice low but firm. "Sir, please, let me handle this." Tom's eyes didn't leave Diane. "You're not handling it," he said, his voice a low growl. "She's lying to the cops about my kid. That's not a complaint. That's a threat." Greg hesitated, caught between protocol and the raw intensity radiating from Tom. The diner was a frozen tableau, customers watching, forks still, phones quietly recording. Diane turned, her phone still to her ear, and locked eyes with Tom. "You're a terrible father," she spat, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Letting your brat ruin everyone's night." She hung up the call, her smirk returning, as if she'd just won a round. But she wasn't done. She took a step toward their booth, her heels clicking with deliberate menace, her face twisted with a kind of righteous glee. Tom felt Laura's hand tighten on his arm, a silent plea to stay calm. But calm wasn't an option anymore. In one fluid, deranged motion, Diane reached across their table, grabbed a full glass of ice water, and smashed it against Sophie's forehead. The crack of glass was like a gunshot. Sophie's scream pierced the air, sharp and raw, as blood streamed down her face, soaking her puppy-ear hoodie. Laura lunged forward, shouting, "Sophie," but Diane turned and shoved her hard. Laura stumbled, her head cracking against the condiment rack. Ketchup bottles toppled, exploding in red pools on the floor. Laura crumpled, dazed, her hands fumbling for the edge of the table. The diner went silent, save for Sophie's quiet sobs and the faint hiss of the fryer in the kitchen. Time slowed. Tom's vision narrowed, the world shrinking to the sight of his daughter's blood-streaked face and his wife's crumpled form. Sophie looked up at him, her eyes wide, lips trembling. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice small and broken. Diane stood over them, panting, adrenaline-fueled, and hissed, "Maybe now someone will shut that kid up." Tom didn't blink. He didn't breathe. Something inside him snapped, a primal switch flipping from restraint to rage. "Get your hands off my family," he roared, his voice shaking the glasses on nearby tables. Diane stumbled back, her confidence faltering as she saw the fire in his eyes. Her foot slipped in the puddle of soda and blood, but she steadied herself, baring her teeth like a cornered animal. "You're a violent man," she spat. "You think you're a hero? You're nothing." Tom moved, closing the distance in 2 strides. Diane reached behind her, her hand closing around a steak knife from a nearby table. "Touch that," Tom growled, his voice low and lethal, "and you'll wish it was just the cops coming for you." She hesitated, but her hand tightened on the knife, raising it clumsily, as if she thought she could intimidate him. She was wrong. The diner's collective gasp was a distant hum. Chairs scraped as people leaned forward, phones still recording. Sophie's sobs echoed in Tom's ears, each one a hammer strike to his heart. He saw Laura stirring on the floor, her hair streaked with ketchup and blood, and Diane, standing there with a knife, daring to think she was in control. "Back off," Diane snarled, waving the blade. "I'll say it was self-defense. I'll say you attacked me." Tom didn't speak. He lunged. Diane swung the knife, a wild, desperate arc. He caught her wrist midair, twisting until the blade clattered to the tile. In one motion, he drove his shoulder into her chest, lifting her off her feet and slamming her back against the booth's wooden paneling. The impact rattled the diner, a collective flinch rippling through the crowd. Diane gasped, winded, her eyes wide with shock as she clawed at his shirt. Tom ripped free, grabbing her by the collar and dragging her toward the front of the diner. Plates shattered as tables were jostled. A glass tipped over, spilling water across the floor. No one stopped him. The crowd watched, some in horror, some in silent approval. "You wanted an audience?" Tom growled, his voice thick with fury. "Let's give them a show." He hauled her past the counter, her heels scraping the tile, her voice rising in a frantic wail. "Get off me. I'm calling my lawyer. You'll pay for this." He stopped by the soda machine, its stainless steel surface gleaming under the diner's lights. Diane flailed, her hands slapping at his arms. "I'm done talking," Tom said, and shoved her hard. Her back hit the machine, the impact snapping a nozzle loose. A geyser of cola sprayed across her face, soaking her blouse and streaking her mascara in black rivers. She shrieked, slipping in the sticky mess, and fell to her knees, drenched and humiliated. "Stop! You're crazy!" she screamed, her voice cracking. Tom loomed over her, his shadow swallowing her trembling form. "No," he said, his voice steady now, cold as steel. "I'm a father. You came after my kid. This is what protection looks like." For the first time, Diane's eyes showed real fun at the performative outrage she'd wielded earlier, but raw, primal terror. It was a look Tom would never forget. She scrambled backward, her hands slipping in the soda-soaked floor. "You assaulted me," she stammered. "I'll press charges. You'll rot." Tom knelt closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Assault? You drew first blood. You bled my daughter. You kicked my wife and smiled when she fell. You want to see what assault looks like? Look around. You earned this." The crowd was silent, but their eyes burned with judgment. Phones stayed up, capturing every second. Diane's hands groped for something to grab, something to save her, but there was nothing. No knife, no phone, no allies. Her teenage kids sat frozen at their table, heads down, as if they could will themselves invisible. Tom grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet. She yelped, her voice a mix of panic and defiance. "Someone stop him," she cried. No one moved. Not Jenny, not Greg, not the customers who'd seen her shatter a glass on a child's face. They were done with her. Tom dragged her toward the kitchen, past the stunned fry cook, toward the industrial fryer. The oil bubbled with a low, menacing hiss, the heat radiating in waves. "Open it," Tom barked at the cook. The young man froze, his hands trembling. "Open it," Tom repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. The cook lifted the fryer basket, the oil glinting under the fluorescent lights. Diane's scream was guttural, primal. "What are you doing? Are you going to kill me?" Tom shoved her face inches from the fryer, the heat licking her skin, the smell of grease thick in her nose. "You feel that?" he hissed. "That's fear. That's what my daughter felt when you smashed glass into her face. That's what my wife felt when her head hit the floor." Diane whimpered, her body shaking. "I didn't mean it," she stammered. "She was loud, that's all." "You're not sorry," Tom said, his eyes boring into hers. "You're just cornered." And then, in a move she didn't expect, he let go. Diane crumpled to the floor, sobbing, her blouse singed at the shoulder where the heat had brushed it. Her hair was a wet, sticky mess, her pride shattered like the glass she'd used as a weapon. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't let them see me like this." Tom turned to the crowd, his voice cold. "Oh, they already have." The diner was a sea of faces, some shocked, some nodding in quiet agreement. Diane's reign of terror, her carefully curated image, lay in ruins. And in that moment, something shifted. The monster who'd stormed their table was gone, replaced by something pathetic, something human. But it was too late. Diane sat crumpled on the greasy kitchen floor, her once pristine blouse clinging to her like wet tissue, her mascara streaking in chaotic lines down her face. The scent of scorched polyester rose from her shoulder where the friar's heat had grazed her. Her hands trembled, clawing at the air as if she could still salvage her pride. But the diner was no longer her stage. The crowd, once silent spectators, now held her in a vice of judgment. Phones stayed raised, their lenses unforgiving, capturing every shudder, every tear. Tom stood over her, his chest heaving, his fists slowly unclenching as the rage that had driven him began to ebb, leaving behind a cold, resolute calm. "You're insane," Diane stammered, her voice cracking as she scrambled backward, slipping again in the slick of soda and shame. "You assaulted me. I'll sue you. You'll lose everything." Tom's eyes didn't waver. He knelt closer, his voice a low, steady blade. "You think this is assault? You drew blood from my daughter. You knocked my wife to the ground. You earned every second of this, and everyone here knows it." The diner was thick with tension, the air heavy with the weight of what had just happened. Sophie's quiet sobs still echoed from the booth, each one a reminder of why Tom had snapped. Laura was stirring now, her hand pressed to her temple, a napkin soaked with blood and ketchup clutched in her fingers. The crowd's silence wasn't passive. Anna Maria was expectant, as if they were waiting for the next act in a drama they couldn't look away from. Greg, the manager, stepped forward, his voice cutting through the haze. "Everyone in this room who's had a problem with this woman before, step up now." For a moment, the diner was still, the only sound the faint hiss of the friar and Diane's ragged breathing. Then, slowly, chairs scraped against the tile. A woman in a floral cardigan stood, her voice trembling but clear. "She screamed at my son last month because he was flapping his hands. He's autistic." She called him a freak. A teenage cashier, barely out of high school, stepped forward from behind the counter. "She threw coins at me when I didn't have exact change fast enough. Called me a lazy idiot in front of everyone." An older man with a cane rose, his voice steady despite his age. "She told me I was a waste of space because I took too long to sit down. Said I was ruining her meal." One by one, voices piled up, a chorus of grievances long buried, now rising like a tide. Diane didn't look up. Her head stayed bowed, her body shaking as the weight of her past crashed down. Then came a voice that stopped even Tom cold. "I have a video." It was a girl, no older than 16, standing at Diane's table. She'd been silent all evening, hunched over her phone, her shoulders tense as if she'd spent years trying to shrink into invisibility. Now she stood tall, her hands trembling but her gaze unwavering. It was Diane's daughter, Ellie. Diane's head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. "Sweetheart, don't," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Don't do this." Ellie's face hardened. "Don't call me that," she snapped, her voice raw with years of suppressed anger. "Not after what you did to them. Not after what you do to me." She turned her phone around, the screen glowing in the dim light of the diner. The video played, loud enough for everyone to hear. Diane's voice, venomous and unmistakable, filled the room. "I should have aborted you. All you do is disappoint me." The footage showed a kitchen, a coffee mug shattering inches from Ellie's head as Diane screamed, her face twisted with rage. The diner went deathly quiet. Diane's hands clawed at the air, her voice desperate. "That's out of context. I was angry." Ellie stepped forward, past the line of witnesses, her voice chillingly clear. "You're always angry, Mom. And no one ever stood up to you until tonight." She turned to Tom, her eyes glistening but resolute. "Thank you." Tom nodded, no words needed. Diane reached for Ellie's ankle, her voice a broken whimper. "Please, don't do this. Don't leave me." But Ellie pulled away, sharp and final. "You left me a long time ago." The words hung in the air, heavier than the friar's heat, sharper than the glass Diane had shattered. The crowd didn't move, but their silence was different now, not shock, but confirmation. Diane had lost everything. Her daughter, her image, her power, and no one was coming to save her. The front door of Rosie's diner swung open with a metallic clang. Two police officers stepped in, their boots heavy on the tile. The older one, broad-shouldered with a squared jaw, scanned the room. "Where's the manager?" he asked, his voice calm but authoritative. Greg pointed at Diane, still crumpled on the floor. "That's her. She assaulted a child and a woman, threatened people with a knife, and filed a false police report." The officer's eyes flicked to Diane, then to the crowd, still filming. The younger officer raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, we need you to stand." Diane blinked, her voice a frantic squeak. "What? You're talking to me?" The older officer repeated, firmer, "Stand." Now. Diane scrambled to her feet, slipping in the soda slick, her blouse dripping, her hair a tangled mess. "No, this is insane. I was attacked. They're lying. That man threw me into the soda machine." The younger officer stepped behind her, unhooking his cuffs. "You're under arrest for assault, endangering a minor, and filing a false report." The cuffs clicked shut, and Diane flailed, her voice rising to a shriek. "I'm the victim. He dragged me. You can't do this." The older officer looked at Tom. "You want to press charges, sir?" Tom didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." Diane's eyes locked onto his, wild with fear and hatred. "This isn't over," she screamed as the officers began leading her out. "I have lawyers. I have rights. I'll sue you all." Tom stepped forward, his voice low and lethal. "Go ahead. I'll countersue you into oblivion, and every parent in this town will know exactly who you are. People like you don't lose because you're evil. You lose because you're weak." The crowd parted as the officers dragged her toward the door. Diane's screams echoed, but they were hollow now, a fading echo of the monster who'd strutted in 30 minutes earlier. Ellie stood silent, her face unreadable, as the door swung shut behind her mother. The diner exhaled, the tension breaking like a dam. Tom's shoulders slumped, the adrenaline draining, leaving only the ache of what had happened. He turned back to their booth, his heart lurching at the sight of Sophie, still curled in Jenny's arms, her hoodie soaked with blood and soda. Laura was sitting up now, her face pale but fierce, dabbing her temple with a wad of napkins. Tom crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside her. "You okay?" he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. She nodded, her eyes glassy. "I will be." "But Sophie." Tom moved to his daughter, kneeling beside her. Sophie's hands trembled, her cheeks streaked with drying tears. "Did I do something bad, Daddy?" she whispered, her voice so small it broke him. He pulled her into his chest, holding her tight, as if his heartbeat could erase the fear. "You did nothing wrong, sweetheart," he said, his voice cracking. "Nothing." The silence in Rosie's diner after Diane's arrest was different, not the tense hush of shock, but a release, like the air clearing after a storm. The jukebox had gone quiet, its last notes fading into the hum of the fryer and the low murmur of the crowd. Tom knelt beside Sophie, his arms wrapped around her small frame, her puppy ear hoodie damp against his chest. Her trembling had eased, but her eyes, usually bright with mischief, were shadowed, searching his face for answers he wasn't sure he could give. Laura sat nearby, her hand pressed to her temple, the napkin now a crumpled mess of blood and ketchup. The weight of the night pressed down on Tom, not just the rage that had driven him, but the pain of seeing his family hurt. Jenny, their server, hovered close, her face pale but kind. "She's okay," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from Sophie's face. "Just scared." Tom nodded, his throat tight. He looked at Laura, who met his gaze with a fierceness that cut through her exhaustion. "We need to get her cleaned up," she said, her voice steady despite the bruise blooming on her forehead. Tom helped Laura to her feet, his hand lingering on her arm, grounding them both. Greg, the manager, reappeared, his face a mix of relief and weariness. "EMS is on the way," he said, "just to be safe." He glanced at Sophie, then back at Tom. "You did what you had to do. Nobody here blames you." The words were meant to comfort, but they didn't erase the image of Sophie's blood-streaked face or Laura's crumpled form. Tom wanted to believe it was over, but the ache in his chest told him the fight wasn't just against Diane, it was against the fear she'd planted in his daughter. The crowd began to disperse, some returning to their meals, others whispering in small clusters, their phones still clutched tightly. A few approached, offering quiet words of support. "You did right," an older woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "That woman had it coming." A man in a trucker hat nodded. "I'd have done the same for my kids." Their words were a lifeline, pulling Tom back from the edge of doubt. But it was Sophie's small hand, clutching his, that kept him anchored. EMS arrived, their lights flashing through the diner's windows, casting red and blue shadows across the tile. A paramedic, a woman with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, checked Laura first. Mild concussion, she said, wrapping a bandage around Laura's head. You'll need to rest, but you'll be fine. She moved to Sophie, cleaning the cut on her forehead with gentle hands. This little one's a trooper, she said, smiling as she applied butterfly bandages. Sophie's eyes widened at the sight of a purple lollipop the paramedic pulled from her pocket. For you, brave girl. Sophie took the lollipop, her fingers hesitant, as if she wasn't sure she deserved it. Tom's heart twisted. He knelt beside her, brushing a tear from her cheek. You're the strongest kid I know, he whispered. She nodded, but the spark in her eyes, the one that had danced as she drew her dragon, was still missing. Tom knew justice had been served, but it wasn't enough. He needed to bring her laughter back. As the paramedics packed up, Greg approached with a plate in his hands. On it sat a warm chocolate chip cookie, soft in the center, topped with a scoop of vanilla ice cream that was already melting into a creamy puddle. For Sophie, he said, his voice gentle. On the house, from all of us. Sophie looked at the dessert, then at Tom, her lips curving into a small, tentative smile. I get to eat this all by myself? She asked, her voice soft but curious. Tom grinned, his eyes stinging. Every bite, kiddo. Sophie took the spoon, her movements slow, careful, as if she was tasting the world again for the first time. And then it happened. A giggle, quiet at first, like a spark in the dark. It grew, bubbling up, free and honest, cutting through the weight of the night. The diner erupted in applause, not for the cookie, not for Tom, but for Sophie. She looked around, startled, then waved, her small hand moving with a confidence that made Tom's heart swell. She was reclaiming her joy, piece by piece. Jenny helped clean up their booth, wiping away the soda and blood, while Laura sipped water, her color slowly returning. The fry cook, a lanky kid named Mike, caught Tom's eye and gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of what had happened. Tom nodded back, a wordless understanding passing between them. The crowd began to thin, but the energy in the diner had shifted. It wasn't just a place to eat, Anna Maria, it was a battlefield where a line had been drawn, and a family had held their ground. As they prepared to leave, Ellie, Diane's daughter, approached. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, but she stood tall. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For what she did to you. To Sophie, Tom shook his head. You don't owe us an apology. You were brave tonight. Ellie's lips trembled, but she nodded. I'm leaving, she said. Moving in with my dad. I can't stay with her anymore. Laura reached out, squeezing Ellie's hand. You'll be okay, she said. You're stronger than you know. The night air was cool as they stepped outside, the stars bright above the parking lot. Sophie twirled beside them, her hoodie ears flopping, a small flag of victory. Laura slipped her hand into Tom's, her grip firm despite her exhaustion. You think they'll charge her? She asked, her voice low. Tom glanced back at the diner, where the police car's lights still flashed. Oh yeah, he said. With all those videos, all those witnesses, she's done. Laura looked at him, her eyes fierce. You didn't just protect us tonight. You made sure no one else has to deal with her again. Tom nodded, but his mind was on Sophie's question, did I do something bad, Daddy? And how close she'd come to believing it. That was what he'd fought for, not just revenge, but the truth. His daughter was innocent, her laughter a gift, not a crime. They reached their car, and Tom lifted Sophie into her seat, buckling her in. She looked up at him, sleepy but safe. Daddy, she whispered, can I laugh again tomorrow? Tom's throat burned, tears threatening to spill. You can laugh every day for the rest of your life, he said, meaning every word. He closed the door, his heart heavy but full, knowing that while Diane had taken their peace for a moment, she hadn't taken Sophie's spirit. The parking lot of Rosie's diner was bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, the cool Ohio night wrapping around Tom, Laura, and Sophie like a quiet promise of calm after the chaos. The flashing lights of the police car had faded into the distance, taking Diane and her venom with them. Tom stood by their minivan, his hand resting on the door handle, watching Sophie's small form in the back seat. Her puppy ear hoodie, still stained with soda and blood, hung loosely on her shoulders, but her eyes were brighter now, clutching the purple lollipop from the paramedic like a tiny trophy. Laura leaned against Tom, her head resting on his shoulder, her bandage stark against her pale skin. The weight of the night lingered, but so did a sense of victory, not just over Diane, but over the fear she'd tried to instill. As Tom started the car, the engine's hum felt like a return to normalcy, a reminder that life would go on. Sophie's voice piped up from the back seat, soft but clear. "Daddy, will the mean lady come back?" Tom glanced at her in the rearview mirror, her wide eyes searching his. "No, sweetheart," he said, his voice steady. "She's not coming back. Not to us, not to anyone." Laura reached back, squeezing Sophie's hand. "You're safe now," she added, her voice gentle but firm. Sophie nodded, popping the lollipop into her mouth, and for the first time that night, Tom saw a spark of her old mischief return. The drive home was quiet, the kind of silence that comes when words aren't needed. Laura's hand stayed in Tom's, her thumb tracing small circles on his knuckles. He thought about the diner, about the crowd that had stood up, about Ellie's courage, and about the moment Sophie's giggle had broken through the storm. It wasn't just about stopping Diane, it was about reclaiming something sacred, something Diane had tried to shatter. His daughter's right to be a child, to laugh, to exist without apology. By the time they pulled into their driveway, Sophie was asleep, her head tilted against the car seat, the lollipop still clutched in her hand. Tom carried her inside, her small body warm against his chest, and tucked her into bed. Laura stood in the doorway, watching, her eyes soft but haunted. "She'll be okay," she whispered, as much to herself as to Tom. He nodded, brushing a strand of hair from Sophie's face, the butterfly bandages on her forehead a stark reminder of the night's cost. "She will," he said. "We'll make sure of it." The next morning, the story of Rosie's diner was everywhere. Local news outlets had picked it up, fueled by the videos posted online by the diner's patrons. Clips of Diane's outburst, her attack on Sophie, and her arrest spread across social media, each one tagged with hashtags like Justice for Sophie and Diner Reckoning. The comments were a mix of outrage and support, with parents sharing their own stories of standing up to bullies, and others debating the line between justice and vengeance. Tom didn't read them, didn't need to. The truth was in Sophie's smile as she sat at the breakfast table, coloring a new dragon, this one with wings and a crown. Laura, sipping coffee, scrolled through her phone, her expression a mix of exhaustion and resolve. "They're charging her with assault, child endangerment, and false reporting," she said, glancing at Tom. "The videos are airtight. She's not getting out of this." Tom nodded, his jaw tight. "Good. Let her face the consequences." He paused, then added, "What about Ellie?" Laura's face softened. "Her dad's picking her up today. She's staying with him permanently. Poor kid's been through enough." The days that followed were a blur of healing and reflection. Sophie's cut began to fade, the bandages replaced by a small, pink scar she proudly called her battle mark. Laura's concussion eased, though she still winced when she turned her head too quickly. Tom, meanwhile, wrestled with the weight of his actions. He'd protected his family, but the image of Diane's terrified face as he held her near the friar haunted him. Had he gone too far? The question gnawed at him, but every time he looked at Sophie, laughing as she chased their dog in the backyard, he knew he'd do it again in a heartbeat. The community rallied around them. Neighbors dropped off casseroles, kids from Sophie's preschool made her get-well cards, and Rosie's diner sent a gift basket with cookies and a note. "For Sophie, our bravest customer." At the diner, the story became legend, a cautionary tale about crossing lines and the power of standing up. Greg, the manager, called Tom a week later. "We're framing Sophie's dragon drawing," he said. "It's going up by the counter. A reminder of what matters." Tom and Laura returned to Rosie's a month later, Sophie bouncing between them, her hoodie replaced with a new one blue, with kitten ears this time. The diner felt different, warmer, like a place that had seen darkness and chosen light. Jenny greeted them with a hug, and Mike, the fry cook, slipped Sophie an extra cookie. The crowd was smaller this time, but the faces were familiar people who'd been there that night, who nodded at Tom with quiet respect. Ellie wasn't there, but Greg mentioned she'd stopped by to say goodbye before moving to her dad's. "She's going to be okay," he said. "Thanks to you." As they ate, Sophie giggled, her laughter ringing out like it had before Diane's shadow fell over them. Tom watched her, his heart full but heavy with the knowledge of how close they'd come to losing that sound. Laura caught his eye, her smile soft but knowing. "We did it," she said quietly. "We protected her." Tom nodded, his hand finding hers under the table. "And we'll keep protecting her. Always." The night at Rosie's diner wasn't just about a shattered glass or a woman in handcuffs. It was about boundaries, about the line between decency and cruelty, and what happens when someone dares to cross it. Diane hadn't just attacked a child, tried to break her spirit, to silence her joy, and she'd expected the world to let her. For years it had. But that night, the world pushed back. Tom didn't just fight for Sophie, fought for every kid who's been told their laughter is too loud, for every parent who's swallowed their anger to keep the peace, for every bystander who's thought, "That's not my fight." The real victory wasn't Diane's arrest or the viral videos. It was the moment Sophie waved to the crowd, reclaiming her throne as a little girl who could laugh without fear. It was Ellie finding her voice, stepping out from her mother's shadow. It was the diner's patrons, strangers turned allies, standing up to say, "Enough." Monsters like Diane don't always lurk in dark alleys. Sometimes they wear pearl earrings and carry purses, justifying their cruelty as manners or truth. But when you face them with action, with unyielding protection, their illusions crumble. As they left the diner that second visit, Sophie twirled under the streetlights, her kitten ears flopping. Tom looked at Laura, his heart steady. "We're okay," he said, not a question but a fact. She nodded, her hand in his. "We're more than okay." And they were. The night had scarred them, but it had also forged them stronger, closer, unbreakable. This story isn't just about one night in a diner. It's about the power of standing up, the cost of silence, and the fire that burns in every parent to protect their own. It's about the courage to draw a line and the strength to hold it. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced someone who crossed a line in public? Did you speak up, or did you wish you had? Where do you stand on the balance between justice and vengeance, between protecting your own and escalating a fight? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories matter, and so does your voice. Let's keep this conversation going, because when we speak out, we remind each other that no one gets to silence our joy.